Yeah, man. Thanks for hopping on with us.
Yeah,
Appreciate
man.
it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know being on TV all day, then jumping at this probably isn't
No,
like the best feeling.
no. It's all good, man. It's all good. It's the best time of the year, so it's a win.
Yeah, definitely.
Are you in the studio pretty much like 7 days a week right now?
No, thankfully, I am not. There's just some random stuff between NFL, still doing some stuff on for the Pac-12 now, and that's all from home. So I'm literally like right here doing these shows. So and then just prepping because we got the East-West Shrine Bowl coming up in a couple weeks. So I'm actually calling the game, which is a little weird, not weird, just unique. I don't do that. So like I'm just kind of like buried in the prep for it.
Man, yeah, you gotta between that and just like college football kind of wrapping up too now. It's probably been nonstop,
huh? It's been crazy, man. Because we even had I needed a couple weeks off there in December, which was nice, and then we had the Snoop Dogg Bowl for the CW, which was awesome. For the rest of my life, I can say I shared a stage with Snoop, so I'm good now. I'm good. So, but it was cool. It was definitely
that's great, man. That's great. Well. We got a big weekend of NFL football coming up and a lot to talk about, as you know. But for those who are just tuning in right now, this is the Deep Dive. And joining us today is a very special guest. We got Mike Yam of NFL Network, who is not just a colleague of mine, but also a friend. So, Mike, thanks for joining the program.
Yeah, man. Absolute pleasure. Super excited. And like you said, best time of the year. Let's go. We got some games, 4 of them as we're creeping a little bit closer to the championship matchup. So I'm jacked, man.
Yeah, we're gonna end with the games for sure, because that's the best thing we want to talk about. But we got to start with today with the coaching carousel, because there's been a lot of news going around. Mike Rabel, obviously the big one to the first box to get checked, right? Going to the Patriots. I think a lot of us kind of saw that one coming. But the Cowboys, we got to start with the Cowboys. They're always in the news, and it's not really for good reasons ever with them. They parted ways with Mike McCarthy. I want to start with this. What do you think about that move? Was that the right move? Because that team this year went 7-10. Obviously, Dak missed like half the season. They had a lot of injuries on the defensive side, and they finished the season on a very strong front, right? And it makes you wonder if they were to run it back with McCarthy for another season or two, could they make some progress there? But what do you think? Was that the right move?
If it was me, I don't know if I would have pulled the trigger on that one. I think and you're seeing it now with this coaching circle and this cycle where there's some demand for Mike McCarthy. I always say to myself, like, all right, if you're going to get rid of your head coach, what's available? What's option B, or really what becomes an option A? Mm-hmm. And McCarthy is, he's an established coach. He's guys who won the Super Bowl. I think your point is a good one, which is you lose your starting quarterback. And Cooper, by the way, Cooper Rush played pretty well in relief for good stretches there. But the reality is, Dak Prescott a year ago was in that MVP conversation. Obviously didn't win it, but he was on that short list of guys who could. You lose a guy at that level, knowing there were questions coming out of that backfield before the season started. I don't know. I don't know if I would have pulled the trigger on a move like that. And I think now when I hear about some of the names that could be in the mix, now could Prime be a guy that takes your organization to another level? I don't know. I mean, you said, hey, the Dallas Cowboys are always talked about. I think if it is a guy like Deion Sanders, what is going to be fascinating to me, did you guys see those comments from Troy Aikman on Monday night?
Yeah.
So just to reset for anyone who didn't, Troy basically on ESPN, and I thought it was eye-opening, said, look, played 12 years in the organization, want the best for them, but our coaches allow the autonomy to be themselves. And the example that he gave was, if Dan Campbell was in Dallas, is Dan Campbell Dan Campbell? I think that's fair. Now, Dan Campbell obviously has built that franchise in Detroit in a very short period of time, made them contenders like that. And I think there's something to be said for that culture. If you think Dan Campbell is a personality, and he is, what do you think Prime is? So, if they do go in that direction, I'm going to be fascinated to see if Jerry Jones, who's got a big personality himself, is going to allow Prime to be Prime. And, if that is the case, maybe that is a good move for the organization, especially if they start winning some football games. But I think there's bigger issues than the head coach that franchise is dealing with. They haven't been able to run the football. They haven't been able to run like, the Dallas Cowboys teams that I grew up with, right? When Emmitt Smith was there, you make an argument, those are the best offensive lines in the NFL. And I think if you want to get back to winning football, there's so much emphasis in the devalued position for a couple seasons. We've been talking about the running back. I look at the teams that are left, and we'll talk about the playoffs coming up here on your guys' show. To me, when I look at these teams, the running backs and the offensive lines, we're talking about some of the best in the NFL that are still alive. And I think that's the recipe for success. So as much as we can blame Mike McCarthy, maybe something needed to change. In my mind, I actually don't know if I would have pulled the trigger on this. I might have kept McCarthy.
Yeah, no, I mean, you make some very interesting points, right? And the run game got away from Cowboys this year. I think they ranked dead last in rushing yards per game for most of the season. And they had a chance to go get Derrick Henry, right? But I don't even think they had a call with him or had a meeting with him. And you see what he's doing this year with the Ravens, obviously, right? And I think, yeah, as we're Niner fans here, Amin and I, so, seeing the Cowboys struggle is great for us. But, putting the bias aside and whatnot, I was kind of surprised by them letting Mike McCarthy go too.
Sure.
And it's not just that they let him go, it's kind of how they handled everything, because if you knew you were going to walk away from Mike McCarthy, it's something they probably they already decided, if not when the season ended, a little bit before.
Sure.
And if they should have made that decision maybe a little bit sooner, because now these guys that are getting interviews like Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, they got to wait until their postseasons are done, right? Because the way the rules are set up. And some teams have already had the luxury of interviewing those coaches. And what if a Ben Johnson loves the situation in Chicago with Caleb Williams and the weapons they got there, and the Cowboys didn't even get a chance to talk to him? It's not just that they let McCarthy go, but it's how they've handled everything,
Yeah, the timing of it is going to be fascinating. And I think to your point on Johnson, and I'll throw Aaron Glenn's name into the mix, the offense and defensive coordinator of the Lions. I think there's a world that exists where there's at least two jobs that are not going to get filled until after the Super Bowl. And it's whichever of those gigs that those two respective guys decide on. And why it becomes even more fascinating, this game of musical chairs that you make reference to, are the Cowboys going to be one of those teams? And in my mind, I don't know if that is the case based off of the rules and being able to interview. So I think your point is well taken. And I also don't know if this was the reality for Dallas. Like, I think there was a world that existed where Mike McCarthy was going to come back, and for whatever reason, there's a lot of reports that are out there, they didn't come to terms, and it was just
he's getting
a lot of
ball. They're not the contract he wanted.
Yeah, just a lot of the minutiae in that contract. And I think maybe the organization and Jerry was optimistic that deal was going to happen. Obviously didn't go down. But I think maybe he thought that McCarthy was going to accept whatever parameters were generally already discussed. And clearly that wasn't the case.
Well, I mean, you have a coach that's coming off, 3 straight 12-win seasons, and he has, a bad year where his quarterback's out for most of the year, dead last in the run game. And, the defense for the second half of the season, they struggled pretty hard as well. Obviously they lost, their defensive coordinator to the Commanders, earlier this year, obviously in the offseason. So, but, who do you think they should be targeting, at this rate? Because, obviously there are some restrictions. They're kind of late to the game. It was kind of puzzling when they didn't let McCarthy interview with the Bears on Monday.
Sure.
But then they turned around and just let him go yesterday. So what do you think, from what you're hearing, what do you think is like the most plausible thing for Dallas now?
Well, look, I mean, the prime rumors are just fun to talk about just because it's prime, right? So there's already that. I don't actually know if he decides to go and leave a place like Colorado, right? I used to cover the Pac-12, been to Boulder multiple times, been around that team, and there's a lot of great things happening in Boulder. And I think what Prime's been able to do is level up the playing field, and I keep wanting to say franchise. They're not a franchise, although I guess in the day and age of NIL, you can make an argument that these are, mini franchises that are out there. But being able to take a university and elevate them to a level, we see how sports can be a vehicle for that. There's been stretches the last couple of years with Prime there where you turn on ESPN or Fox and like they're doing full shows on that campus and not just on game day. Like that doesn't happen in the college realm, and that's because of Prime. So of course we that's going to be one of the names that we're going to throw out there. But look, at least in my mind, and we could talk about this, and I think you wanted to, Sandeep, a little bit later in the show, but the job that I saw Aaron Glenn do week 18 against the Vikings, and what we've seen this defense be, even with some of these injuries, man, he'd be on the short list for me on any team, whether it's the Cowboys or anyone else. I'm just a huge fan and think the world of what he's been able to accomplish in Detroit.
Yeah, there's quite a few names and still a handful of teams that are looking for coaches. I mean, as it pertains to the Cowboys, we've seen them connected to a lot of guys, right? They're supposed to interview Robert Saleh, who we want back here in the Bay. Ben Johnson's been connected. Like you said, Prime's been connected. Your colleague today, Ian Rappaport, said that Kellen Moore is one of the lead candidates.
Yeah.
He was the former OC, right? Yeah. So it makes sense on that front too. But we've seen Bill Belichick. His name's been tossed around because supposedly he has, I don't know, I've been seeing a bunch of different reports right now. Supposedly he hasn't even signed his contract yet. And if he did, there's a $10 million buyout too, I think. And it just goes back to what I said, right? Had they known in the season or at some point late in the season that they weren't going to bring McCarthy back, you would think that Bill Belichick was a guy that they would let him know, like, hey, this job is going to open up, so don't take anything else. But they clearly didn't know, because they probably would have handled it better.
Yeah. I look at the Robert Saleh thing, and I know you're wearing that Niners hoodie right now. Yeah, you don't want that to happen. I actually think there's a lot of reasons why Robert Saleh should head back to the Bay Area. There's a lot of jobs that are up right now, but I think the list that you threw out there is a good one. Kellen Moore has got that experience there. I'd also say this: he knows what to expect with Jerry Jones as a team owner, because he's already worked there. So I do think that's an interesting factor, part of this equation, no question.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a factor for sure, because like you said, with Prime in Colorado, he runs a show over there, right? From top to bottom. But the Cowboys, it's Jerry Jones that runs it. And is he going to be okay with a guy like Prime who wants his have his hand in the say in everything, whether it comes to who they draft, who they start, who they cut, all the coaches, right? Prime's going to want to be controlling of that. And I mean, that's how it should work when you hire a coach, right? You let him pick his staff and build it out the way he wants. But we just know Jerry Jones he doesn't operate that way. So it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, we're definitely praying on their downfall, but as Niner fans, but it's definitely going to be, like I said, interesting to see who emerges. And it seems like Kellen Moore probably is going to end up being that guy, but a lot of coaches out there. So we'll see. I want to talk to you about a couple of quarterbacks now.
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers and Sam Darnold, a couple of quarterbacks who very different points in their career. Aaron Rodgers, not the season he wanted to have with the Jets, and 2 seasons there. He's played maybe 17, 18 games in total, because he missed the first season with the Achilles tear. And today he was on the Pat McAfee show and said that, whether he comes back for another season or not is going to depend on who the Jets hire as their GM, who they hire as their coach. What do you think about just how things have gone for him and the Jets when you look at the injury, the firing of Rob Saleh, and then now him being on the verge of retirement?
This is tough. You mentioned, you're sort of rooting against the Dallas Cowboys. You're also talking to a Giants fan, so it's not exactly like I'm rooting for Dallas to do well. And I bring only up the Giants aspect to this, because if I said to you, what organization feels like it's in a tougher spot right now in New York City, is it the Jets or the Giants? I think there's a compelling case for both of those squads. The Rodgers situation to me is really interesting. Clearly, Aaron would probably tell you this, just didn't live up to what he thought his time in New York would be. We were talking about this team potentially as a Super Bowl contender for the last 2 years, and there's reason for optimism. This thing tailspinned real fast. Last year, you can story what happened when the guy doesn't play and he gets hurt in the first game. All good. I mean, a couple snaps in. That's going to change the trajectory of your entire season. I think right now what's fascinating is he's talking about his time to come back is dependent on front office and head coach. Like, I'd make the argument that it's also reverse there too, right? Depending on who that head coach and who's in that front office, do they want Aaron Rodgers back? And maybe the answer is yes, maybe not. But Aaron didn't look like, Aaron Rodgers from a few years ago. And I don't think Jets fans were expecting MVP Rodgers, right? And I thought you saw a boost those last 2 weeks, 3 weeks of the season, big game from Devontae Adams. I just think that there's a lot of questions for both the Jets and the Giants, but for Aaron Rodgers, if it's not New York, I do think there's some potential fits. I'd have to probably give it a little bit more time in my head. I think Sam Darnold will probably have more options than Aaron Rodgers, which I almost can't believe those words just came out of my mouth. But just based off of the success that he had. Now, Sam's interesting because of how the season played out. I actually thought for a good stretch of this year, there was no way in hell Minnesota could let this guy walk.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he comes back to Minnesota this year.
Yeah, now they're like, here's the door. Sorry.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, now you got JJ. You clear the path for him coming back off of injury, who was, for all intents and purposes, probably going to be your starter heading into this last season. I just, I don't think it's all his fault, and I think it's unfair. And I think, you guys have been around sports forever, and anyone who's watching this, they understand this. The quarterback gets all the attention and all the praise. And then when things don't go well, they also get all the criticism, sort of the same as the head coaches. And I actually don't think that, look, week 18, he missed some throws, and, maybe he hits Justin Jefferson in that first half, in that first quarter. We're talking about a different game because that changes the dynamics of everything. Mm-hmm. The issue that he looked shook on Monday night against the Rams.
Your team goes.
That'll happen. I worked, I had pregame and postgame on NFL Network on Monday, and I was working with David Carr, and I said, what's the most amount of times right before we came on air? I'm like, what's the most amount of times you ever got sacked? Because, at that point it was 9 sacks for Sam, and which ties a playoff record, by the way. And David, no hesitation, 10. I was like, oh, okay. I said, well, what happens when that's happening in a game? And he goes, it looks exactly like what we just saw. Like, you're seeing stuff that's actually not there because you're so paranoid. You said see ghosts. I think that's a good way of describing it. The dude looked shook in that game. And I think that's the biggest reason why. We ran the press conference of Kevin O'Connell on the post-game show. And there's a few moments there where I'm like, oh, damn, he's defending Sam, and he's making the case why Sam should come back. And then by the end of the press conference, I'm like, oh man, this sounds like a bad breakup. Like, I've been on the receiving end of some of these comments in my younger years. And I'm like, oh, I don't think he's coming back here. So I don't think it's all his fault, though. I really don't. And it's just a shame that it played out the way that it did.
No, he had a phenomenal season, obviously, right? Like, there was even talks, around like week 14, week 15, where people were like, would you choose Sam Darnold over Brock Purdy, which obviously we'll get to in a minute here. But I think we can kind of quell that here in the Bay Area. I think, they got their guy, but yeah, he has definitely played himself into contention for a lot of different teams right now to be their starting quarterback next season. I could probably name at least 10 teams right now that need a starting quarterback going into 2025. Sure. I wouldn't be surprised if he lands back in New York, but with your Giants, because you guys do need a quarterback as well. Yeah. Wouldn't be surprised if the Jets are interested in him again, depending on what kind of offensive coach they bring in to help.
That'd be hilarious.
Yeah. I'm laughing in my head. I'm like,
it would be like a full circle moment for him. But the two New York teams is who I see as pretty like strong, contenders to kind of like sign him. But I think he's going to probably stay in the NFC somewhere. It's a little bit easier conference, obviously. Sure. He's going to see a different type of defense in the NFC versus the AFC. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes. But he's definitely going to get paid. But if the Vikings aren't, which they are, they're going to let JJ McCarthy become the starting quarterback, use that cap space to sign other players that they need, on the offensive and defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, no, they got some holes. And look, this was a pretty complete team. And I think it's now what's the thing that might put them over the top? Brian Flores, by the way, another guy who could be in New York. I saw some reports that he was interviewing, for the Jets job, and certainly could go and get that blitzing defense. Like, that could be really intriguing just in terms of the coaching carousel. But to get back to your point, like, I hadn't thought about Sam in New York as with the Giants or the Jets. And I think it's because of his time with the Jets. Although what's fascinating about that is if he ends up in New York wearing that green uniform again, that'll by far be the best offensive line he's ever played with in New York, because there was issues there. I mean, it was a revolving door in front of him for a long period of time. Yes. Guys were banged up offensively. I mean, Garrett Wilson alone is by far the best thing that organization has in place. So like, that would be good. I don't know. God, and this is like the fan in me. You know who I've been rooting for the Giants to go and grab, and that's Justin Fields. I actually wanted him a year ago, and I thought he could be a good fit with Brian Daboll. Because here's the other thing, and not to make this a NFL draft conversation, but if you look at the top 10, I think you can make an argument. I was doing a show. Brian Baldinger said it could be 7. I think it's more like 6, but the reality is, let's just call it between 5 and 7 teams need a quarterback that are at least currently picking in the top 10. There are not 5 to 7 first
Not at all.
round quarterback arms, right? Like last year was an anomaly. It was a great quarterback class. We saw flashes of Michael Penix late. We haven't seen JJ McCarthy, but Bo Nix is a guy that we feel great about, right? He could be offensive rookie of the year. Jaden Daniels is probably going to win that award. And then Caleb, that's a historic class. I don't think that that's this class. So there's going to be some of these teams. And I think the Giants are a prime example of that, where you might have to dip into, and I think it's a good point, the Sam Darnold pool, the Justin Fields pool, right? Like you're going to, the Aaron Rodgers pool, like there's going to be some guys that are going to need to fill a need because you can't reset. What's fascinating, and I know you guys are in the Bay, so probably shouldn't be talking to all this East Coast, New York football.
No, it's all good.
The only last thing I'll say about this is when they decided, when the organization and John Mara goes, hey, like we're bringing back Joe Shane, we're bringing back Brian Daboll, but the expectation is to go and win now. All good. Are you drafting a rookie quarterback? Because if you are, like generally speaking, they don't win right away. I know we saw two of them get to the postseason in Bo and Jaden Daniels. Jaden still, obviously, his team is still alive in a matchup against the Lions this weekend. But I just think that puts a lot of pressure on this team to go win now. And there are a lot of holes on that squad. So in my mind, does it make sense to do and to go and reach maybe for a quarterback with where you're picking? I don't know if the answer is yes.
If there's anything that we know about reaching, we know out of here. You trade the first round picks essentially to go get Trey Lance.
Don't reach for a quarterback.
No. Don't have to reach for a quarterback. Take the guy in the 7th round, the last pick of the draft. He'll probably pan out better.
But here's the thing about that, and I actually covered that draft for NFL Network. That was like my first real assignment after I'd gotten hired. And you're right, like they traded up. And there was so much conversation. God, I wish I could try to pull up my notes. I don't know if I'd find them quick enough, and people would be bored just staring at the side of my head as I'm looking at my other computer. But there was such a lack of college reps. And Bo Nix is another guy who had more starts than anyone in coming out of college football. But Brock Purdy had a ton of starts as well. Yep. So I think there's something to be said for that. And I always tell Niners fans, and I lived in San Francisco for like 10 years, so I root for the team. And I want them to do well, but you got your guy, like you got your quarterback. So it didn't look the way that you thought, but when you net out with a result, I'm a results guy. Like it doesn't matter. You might take some left turns, maybe a U-turn here and there and a hard right, but as long as you get to the place where you ultimately want it to be. And I think the Niners got there, and I think it's a bitter pill to swallow because of how much capital came up. But if you just say to yourself, hey, just close your eyes, it was Brock Purdy that they took in the first round, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, it's really hard to ignore the picks that were used. Obviously, in that trade, right? Like, Tyreek Hill was one of those picks was used, right? So to get obviously from Kansas City, and a couple of defensive players and offensive players as well. So it's hard not to think about, but yeah, like you said, he saved, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan by performing the way he did and fitting into the system seamlessly, because if he didn't, we'd probably have a new head coach by now.
Yeah. And by the way, if that is the case, and I was doing a guest spot on KMBR the other day, and they had asked me if I thought Kyle was on the hot seat. I'm like, man, if he is, I'm telling you, there's a lot of teams that back up the truck to go and get him. Like, I think he's one of the premier coaches in the NFL.
Yep.
He'd probably sit in my top 5. Don't ask me to rank him, but I would just say he's in the top 5 for me.
For sure.
Yeah, us Niner fans here in the Bay, gone back and forth over the season, because it's when you're having a down season, right? Coming off a Super Bowl appearance too, and you're starting to lose games, something you're not used to over the last few years. You start talking about everything, right? And the Kyle Shanahan on the hot seat has been like one of the big topics of conversation. And that's perfect segue to getting into 49er talk right now. But, Shanahan, like you said, top 5 coach in the NFL. Yes, he hasn't been able to get over the hump yet, but, we gave him some slack, even though we were hard on him at times too, because everything that happened with the Niners this year. Yeah. So I mean, from the outside looking in, we're Niner fans, so we know what went wrong. But when you look at it from the perspective of an NFL media member and someone who covers the NFL, what did you see from the Niners and kind of what went wrong and how they can fix things next season?
I thought they could get back to the Super Bowl before the year started, and I think looking back to seeing how training camp went and the first few weeks of the season, that's just a microcosm of what we got. Yeah. And I think it's easy to figure out why the struggles were here if you just look at that sample size. When Brandon Ayuk's not really around the team because he's looking for a contract. By the way, good for him to go and get it. And proof is in the pudding. This is why players hold out. This is why they want their money, because the game is a violent sport.
Tell my dad we're not firing Kyle Shanahan.
No, no. We're not firing Kyle. And by the way, if you did, and once again, there's a lot of teams that would love to go and get him. But I would. The one thing for me is when, Brandon gets banged up. Okay. Like it happens, right? Trent Williams is looking for a bigger deal. Now, I think Trent deserves the bigger deal. And I can't even tell you how many times I was popping on radio in the Bay Area and I'm saying, hey, everyone's talking about Brandon Ayuk. We need to talk about arguably the most dominant player at his position in Trent Williams, also looking for contract. Now, the good news is they got it done and that was a win. But I don't know if you guys felt like I think there might have been a little bit of conditioning stuff early on.
Oh, yeah.
We saw it. He was huffing and puffing after every other play.
Yeah. So like that's a little bit of an issue. Then Christian McCaffrey goes down and then Brandon gets hurt. Like this is what it was going to be. And I can't help but think now some would argue, hey, Christian goes down. They were still able to run the ball effectively. I get it. But Christian's so dynamic. He's so different. He's so unique. He's so talented. It's not just about some of the statistics that we saw. Like you need to go and execute. And I don't know. I just wasn't surprised. Like when those guys aren't healthy, there's only so much you can go and do. Yeah. And George Kittle was amazing this year. I'm a big fan of Brock Purdy. I'm not one of those guys that says don't go and pay him. I've said this numerous times. He is a $200 million quarterback. And that's not breaking news. That's not being dramatic. That is the going rate for what quarterbacks get. And Jordan Love just got that. I would take Brock over Jordan Love. And maybe that's a hot take, but I'm just telling you based off of what I've seen, like Brock got to a Super Bowl here. Brock has come off an injury. And I was surprised that we saw him as early as we did coming off of that I think it was like a UCL, whatever that surgery that he had. So, to me, I'm a huge fan. I do think, I won't say the window is closed for this Niners team, but I do think there is a lot of pressure for this upcoming season for this team to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of lean into it already a bit, but Brock Purdy, obviously, like the big payday is expected. A lot of people here are back and forth. We're like you. Brock Purdy's our guy. I feel confident in a quarterback for the first time in a long time. Don't ask me how I feel about Jimmy G because I can spend the next 30 minutes just going off on that. But Purdy's
Jimmy,
the guy.
What did Jimmy throw for like 300? The other day, week 18, something along those lines. I got to look that up because
all I saw was the interception, honestly.
He had a chance to win the game for them. And what does he do? He throws it at the feet of the receiver and they lose the game. So that's typical Jimmy G fashion right there.
Yeah. Give him a chance, I guess. I don't know. But no, I'm with you. It was funny. We were doing, Stafford obviously been playing the week 18 matchup, and that was a good call from Sean McVay. And we had a lot of Rams fans inside our building being in Los Angeles at NFL. And a few of them were like, no, Jimmy's going to carry him. I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised if he puts up some big numbers. I don't know if they win. And sure enough, the numbers were pretty good, but obviously the result was not.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, that's Jimmy G for you. We know him all too well, But no, I mean, this Niners team, like you said, man, everything you said, we recognize it from the start, the Ayuk situation, the Trent situation. And that's why I'm really hoping that this time around with Brock Purdy, it's something they take very seriously and get it done ASAP. Maybe in a best case scenario, they get that contract done before the NFL draft, right? Because then you can just focus on the draft, focus on free agency when that window opens up. Yeah. But the Niners have had a bad habit of letting these contract things linger. But I feel like with the quarterback one, you don't want to let it linger.
Totally.
Yeah,
I'm with you 100%. And to your point, I don't know if this thing gets done because that's not what their MO has been. And maybe you're right. Maybe that is, it's the quarterback position and they'll handle business. The only other thing I would add, and not to be funny about the Jimmy G situation, but if Jimmy G isn't Jimmy G, you don't have Brock. So that was one of the telling things. Like Jimmy played well enough, right? And I remember when I was covering that Trey Lance draft, I don't know if it was John or Kyle, one of them. There's so many damn press conferences back then. But I remember them saying like, hey, we were transparent. We were honest with Jimmy. And had Jimmy not had the injuries pile up and not be able to really play a full season, they weren't going to explore moving up to go and trade for one of these quarterbacks who ended up being Trey Lance. So all I say is, if Jimmy was not Jimmy, you don't end up with the guy that you like, which is Brock Purdy. So let's put a positive spin on this.
Yeah, hopefully it's one of those situations where like we realize it 5 years from when this all happened, which is back in 2020, 2021, whenever it was. And you go into, the year 2026, Super Bowl 60 is in Santa Clara this year, which is the home stadium for the 49ers, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's ever a time, and me and Sandeep have talked about this for the last like 6 weeks, if there's ever a time that they could ever win one, it would be this one where they're at home essentially, throughout the playoffs and for the Super Bowl and in front of their home fans. And, that quest for 6 at Super Bowl 60 is kind of like the drum that we're beating right now. So do you think that there's a realistic possibility if they hit, obviously in the draft, right? So many things have to go right. If they hit the contracts, if the guys come back healthy the way they do you think that they are going to be a legitimate contender next year in the
Hell
NFC?
yeah. Hell yeah. I mean, I would put them on the short list, even coming off this year. But I think a lot of that has to do with what do we get in training camp? Like how healthy do these guys look? And I know a lot of times we're not even watching them in pads and the whole thing, but it's hard for me to look at this roster when it's healthy and not call them one of the best teams in the NFC. So I'm with you 100%. I think this has got to be the year though. And I feel like Niners fans are probably saying that every single year. That's kind of
we've been saying that probably for like 3 years now, but
Yeah,
I mean, like you said, right? Super Bowl is here, but it's not just that. I mean, we have the easiest schedule in the league next season. And if, we've talked about this too, I think this offseason is the most pivotal one in the John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan era, because this season, all right, a lot of injuries. And you think about all the injuries they had, they still had a chance to make the playoffs, right? They blew all of their division games. You win those games, you're in the playoffs right now. With a team that was missing Christian McCaffrey, missing Brandon Ayuk. Maybe the conversation, if they're in the playoffs, the conversation about Purdy is way different right now, right? They're not even talking about, is he going to get a contract? It's how much is he going to get, right? So it'll be way different, but obviously things didn't roll out that way. So do you have the script for next season? Like, what does it say for the 49ers?
Hold on. Let me check my NFL email real quick and I'll tell you what that is. No, like I said, I do agree with you guys wholeheartedly. I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism coming off of a rough season, and like you can story some of this stuff. I can't wait to see some of the adjustments. What's their draft position? Are they 13? 11th. Okay. So they're picking 11th. What direction do they go? And for me, if you think the window is like tight, which I'm one of those guys that thinks it's tight, I would love to see another pass rusher on that D line. Like I don't know. I feel like the last couple of years outside of Bosa, who's obviously like the monster of monsters, but outside of him, like I don't know if they've totally got that on lock on a consistent basis. So, I got to take, we're starting to do our prep and digging into the NFL draft stuff. So I couldn't give you a name on like who those top pass rushers are going to be, but at 11, you got an opportunity here, especially considering the amount of teams that we've seen go heavy offense early. There's an opportunity for the Niners to get better, like very fast because of the draft.
Yeah. One of our, followers over here was a friend of ours, Arnold. He said, get a center in free agency and draft a starting right tackle. The O-line is definitely like a big area of concern for the 49ers. I mean, Purdy was scrambling for his life this season, and that's because the O-line outside of pretty much Dominic Pooney was not that good this year. Obviously, Trent went down at some point, missed the last 6-7 weeks of the season, but we're expecting the first 4 or 5 rounds are going to be heavy in the trenches on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, no, and they have to, at least in my mind, and it makes some sense there, especially when I look at the teams right now that are still alive, like the Eagles, to me, number one top ranked defense, make an argument, right? Like one of the best offensive lines in the game. I think Washington's offensive line has really stepped up in a meaningful way. The D line for Houston, Detroit, both sides of the football, especially on the offensive line. So it makes some sense if you want to win some of these games and get to the postseason, then eventually win a Super Bowl. Like it's got to get addressed.
Yeah, 100%. They say that you win the battle in the trenches, you're going to win the football game, and the Niners have been so good at that. Obviously, the last 3 or 4 years outside of this year. Hopefully they get back to that, and it's going to really depend on the defensive coordinator that they bring in. Like we're saying, we hope it's Robert Saleh. He can at least dial up an exotic blitz compared to like what Steve Wilkes and Nick Sorensen was doing on the first year on the job this year. So, we're really hoping out here that they can make some changes that are going to be positive. And like I said, like the expectation next year should be Super Bowl, because a lot of these guys are going to be back probably for their final year. I feel like if not this year, that was probably the case, but maybe next year it's going to be a situation similar to that because of the contract situation with Brock Purdy and all that. So
there's some real tough decisions that John Lynch is going to have to make over the next, year or so. And it does start obviously with Robert Saleh, as I see that up there on the screen, who oh my God, I mean, Niners fans have to be giddy about the prospects of Robert Saleh coming back. And I know he's interviewing for head coaching jobs. I
hope he bombs all those interviews.
Yeah. The only thing that I would say is, Ben Johnson's a good example of this, and the circumstances aren't identical because Ben obviously is an offensive coordinator and he's coaching, right? And had the opportunity to take some jobs last year, whereas Robert Saleh's coming off a year where he got fired and is going to get some of those interviews. The only thing that I would say is, Ben's stock, which was already really high, went another level.
Yep.
And, for Robert Saleh, I think he needs to figure out two things. One, the jobs that I'm interviewing for, do I love these destinations? Can I win with them? And if the answer is yes, great. Like, go, do your deal. But then if that's not the case, then I think he needs to decide, am I better off taking a DC job in a place like San Francisco if I feel like that team can thrive on that side? Just is he sipping the Kool-Aid that the three of us are sipping, which is like, hey, this squad got a chance to get back to the Super Bowl here if they're healthy. If that's the case, that's pretty damn attractive because then your stock goes even higher than it is now. So I think that's a win. Or he says, hey, I'm maybe not sipping the Kool-Aid that the three of us are sipping right now. And I don't know if the Niners can get back there. Then I say to myself, maybe this is not the job that I want to take because maybe that stock dips a little bit. So it's a little bit of a game of chicken where he needs to figure out, weigh the three options that are there. Sitting out a year might not be the worst thing. I mean, we saw Mike Vrabel, right? He didn't sit out. He was obviously on the staff in Cleveland, but he wasn't in the trenches in terms of, I think the role was special assistant or whatever that title was. But people thought well of him. And, that was, I don't know. I don't want to say Gerard Mayo would have gotten that job because it was in his contract, but let's just say this. I'm sure Robert Kraft was very, very excited when he realized he had an opportunity to get Mike Vrabel back in New England.
Yeah, it's one of those situations last year that I thought about also, when he got let go from Tennessee.
Yeah.
That Robert Kraft will go after Mike Vrabel, but it might have been something where maybe they already had a discussion with Gerard Mayo. Maybe
it was in his contract. It was a few years ago. They had put that in. They weren't letting Gerard go and interview for jobs. And the reason why was Robert Kraft didn't want to lose him. And, Robert Kraft actually made reference to it when Gerard got fired, and he said, hey, it was probably a bad job by me putting him in a spot, but I don't know if they thought that Belichick was going to be out. I think they maybe that timeline was one more year. So Mayo would have been around that team on that staff before he had to take the keys to the car. But look, there's some pieces there in New England. They got some major questions as well, but they're a better team with Mike Vrabel on the sidelines. Most teams in the NFL would make that claim.
For sure.
Mike, a question from one of our followers again. Have you heard or seen any reports on Gus Bradley or Dennis Allen being linked to the 49ers as potential DCs?
Bradley, I have not. I'd have to go through my emails because I did see Dennis Allen's name pop up in my inbox. Candidly, I was in the middle of sending emails to college coaches ahead of the East-West Shrine game to circle up with them. So I didn't go through it, but I don't think either one of those guys, according to our insiders, as I'm saying,
yeah,
I'm
the
doing
only
what
guy
I said
I've
I
seen
wouldn't
them.
do.
Only guy I've seen them interview is the DB's coach from the Lions. I can't remember his name right now, but I remember seeing that reported that they already interviewed him.
So Rap Sheet, Ian Rappaport was reporting Colts interviewed Dennis Allen for their DC job. That was the last update that I think I have in my inbox. So for whatever that's worth.
Okay, sounds good. I mean,
like
I said,
your audience is so disappointed. They're like, man, you got this dude from NFL Network, and he's not breaking stories. He doesn't know. That's not my role. So I can only tell you what the guys who are sourced up, which is our actual insiders. I'm just going off of their stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I said, we're hoping for Salah back. So, we're hoping that he sees his other situations out there, like the Raiders, like the Jaguars, like the Cowboys, and for whatever reason, like you said, maybe he's like, I'm gonna come back to the Niners for a season or two, build up my stock, and maybe there's a better job out there next season if he decides to leave. And hopefully a year from now, if that's the case, he's leaving as a Super Bowl champion. But that's a discussion for another day. All right, let's get into some divisional round talk, man, because last weekend's games, weren't all that great. We were hoping for a little bit more excitement aside from that Bucks and Commanders game, which was, amazing, came down to the wire. But this weekend we got some really good games. So we'll start from top to bottom. Chiefs and Texans. The Chiefs 8.5-point favorite in this one. The Texans going into Arrowhead. I didn't even think they were going to be here. Aman and I both had the Chargers winning that game last week. So, the Texans, but here they are coming back. CJ Stroud, we saw him look like rookie year CJ Stroud last week, especially that one play he made, avoiding the sack, scrambling out, throwing a 20-yard dart down the field, leading that 99-yard drive, right, to score a touchdown. So what do you think for the Texans? I mean, how can they win this game? Do they have a chance to win this game? I mean, you're going into the Chiefs, to Arrowhead in the winter. This is hard. So, what does it take for them?
It is not to sidetrack here. Can I just call like a little bit of an audible?
Go for it.
Of course.
All right. So you guys are making reference to like these comments. You're throwing them up there. So like I want to act like I've used like StreamYard, right? Like this is what we're doing to do this show. So I'm like, how come I'm not seeing any of this stuff? Like I've done these hits before where so I'm in like this private chat thing and like you guys obviously. So then I'm like, oh, there's comments here. I mean, Dan, we love you, Mike. Are you kidding? Let's go, Dan. I appreciate this. You guys are hiding all the good stuff. Like I'm getting some love here, and you're asking me about Dennis Allen and Gus Bradley. Like, thank you. Show me that. Those are the types of things that I want to see. So, but always kind of cool to see some of these comments, and I'm glad people are getting kind of geeked up for this. So, but to your point on the Houston Texans, like we'll go back to what the topic at hand is, which is postseason football. You're right. CJ played great. I don't know if this is God, I just wish I saw more of this from Houston all season long, like to flip the switch. Because if you would have told me that this was a playoff matchup at the beginning of the year, I would have said, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think a lot of us really like this Houston squad. If they can duplicate the turnovers, which is a tall task. I mean, Justin Herbert was, arguably the most efficient quarterback. That's probably overstating it considering what Lamar and Josh were able to do. But the point is like still on the short list, right? He threw more interceptions in that game than he did the entire season. Like Justin was phenomenal. If Houston's able to generate some of that, I like it to be an interesting game. I don't know if I have, the cojones to pick against the Kansas City Chiefs in this scenario, but they've had a couple weeks off, right? Last time we saw Mahomes throw a touchdown, you got to go back to Christmas Day. So it's been a hot minute here, but yeah, I'm all about just seeing a good performance. And the one thing that I really hope we see from Houston is Joe Mixon early. I feel like the offensive game plan for the Texans is here you go, CJ, you're a stud, make it happen. And I can't help but think if Joe's a little more involved early in the game, that we'll see the best of CJ late.
He's questionable Saturday. Mixon.
He'll play.
I know, probably.
It's postseason, baby. Let's go, man. Yeah.
They're going no matter what.
Had to spice it up a little bit, just throw some in there, but I think what you said is very true. If the Texans want to have any chance to win this game, they're going to have to force some turnovers while also taking care of the ball themselves, right? Because you don't want to give extra possessions to Mahomes, obviously. But, their secondary, really good job last week, like four interceptions, like you mentioned. But it starts with their D-line. I mean, they did a really good job of getting after Herbert last week, and that's what it's going to take. I mean, this Chiefs team, as we know, somehow, some way, again, is back here with the number one seed. Coming into this season, actually, Elman was like, I think this is the season they tinker off a little bit. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I mean, defending champs, they continue to stock up in the right areas. And Mahomes probably had, maybe like a QB 15 this season when you look at his stats, but he knows how to win.
Yeah.
I was watching
QB 15 too, because of the first half of that season, right? Like Joe Tooney moves on that offensive line, things dramatically change for him. Turnovers go down, guys start getting healthy. Backfield obviously was banged up for a good stretch of this season. He was running for his life. I mean, there was a stretch. I mean, he was like, it's every single game was 3, 4, 5 sacks. And I think that's what Sandeep, you're making reference to. Like if Will Anderson, who's playing like a man possessed, gets it going, like maybe that is one of those factors, right? Like, can you get Mahomes down on the ground? Can you go, knock the ball out of his hand? And we're talking about, stealing a possession on the defensive side. Derek Stingley doesn't get nearly enough credit for how good he is in that corner spot. We saw last year to play big. Like these are dudes on the team. They just grossly, in my opinion, underachieved for most of the season. And now we're seeing this team and you want to play your best football at the end. And clearly coming off of that playoff win, they are.
it's just one of those situations to me. I've never seen a team in the NFL literally win almost every single game on the last possession, whether it's on offense or on defense.
Yeah.
And the last, I want to say the last 3 or 4 years, they've probably been the most clutch team I've ever seen in my life in the NFL, specifically Patrick Mahomes. What his influence is on that offense and how he, pump fakes and he runs for 25 yards, all those kind of things. Like people, are hesitant to hit him because, they think that they're going to get a penalty, but he's just so smart with it. Obviously, we experienced that this earlier this season when the Niners played the Chiefs. He didn't get cracked on the sideline, but he should have when he pumped big and still ran for another 15 yards. But
hey, that was his worst game of the season.
That was the worst game of the season,
and they still smacked us by 2 touchdowns or whatever it was.
He threw 3 picks that game, I think, and he was pretty bad, and we still lost by I think 15 or 16 points. So he's just so clutch, and I saw a crazy stat today. If he wins on Sunday, he'll be tied with Joe Montana for the second most wins by a quarterback in NFL history in the postseason.
So crazy.
Before he's 30 years old.
Yeah, he's 29 years old or something.
Yeah, and obviously Tom Brady, he's number one. He's going to pass Tom Brady at some point within the next few years if they keep it going.
Yeah,
it seems like they're not going to slow down.
I was doing a show, and this is after I guess it was last year's Super Bowl win. Mark Ross, who worked with the Eagles, worked with the Giants, he was in their front office, one of our analysts in NFL Network, and it's like talk radio, right? Like you get to the offseason, you're like coming up with topics, and some of them are a little outlandish. So in our production meeting, someone said, "Hey, is Patrick Mahomes the greatest of all time?" And I'm like, "Come on, guys! Like, are we really having this conversation?" And Mark's like, "Yeah, he is." And I said, "Oh, okay, we're having this conversation." But I think it speaks to your point on the statistics when you look at career wins in the playoffs, his ability to win late in games. Like there is this Mahomes factor that is very much apparent. Like it doesn't matter if they're down late. It reminds me of when I would watch a game and Tom Brady would strut out there and they were down a possession, whether they needed a field goal, needed a touchdown, whatever. I'm like, yeah, they'll win. They got Tom. And it's the same thing with Pat. I'm like, yep, 15's out there. 1-5's going to win it for him.
Yeah, the NFL posted this 2-minute highlight reel of Mahomes is just clutch plays over the last few years in the playoffs. Yeah. And I don't know why, but I ended up sitting there for 2 minutes and watching through it. And, I got some PTSD when there's plays against the Niners that came up from the Super Bowls, but there's been so many games, so many moments, whether it's he's making a pump fake in a run or running with his legs to pick up a first down, hitting Travis Kelce down the seam with 8 seconds left against the Bills to set up the field goal. So, Mahomes he's inevitable. And, as Niner fans, there's 2 teams that we don't want to win this year, and it's the Chiefs and the Rams. Those are the teams we don't want to see move on. But in this game, it's like you said, you're not going to pick against Mahomes. I want to ask you something real quick.
Yeah.
When it comes to making game picks, are you allowed to change your game? Like, let's say right now I'm like, all right, I'm picking the Texans to win. Let's just say I said that. Can I change my pick of the game, who I'm picking up until game time, or is that locked in because I said it here?
No. I'll switch the pick depending on the audience. So if I'm in doing a radio hit in Kansas City, it's all about the Chiefs. If I'm doing a radio hit in Houston, go Texans. No, you can there's going to be changes, right? Like sometimes a guy gets hurt. Like you guys told me, hey, Mixon's questionable. All right. Well, if he doesn't play, I got to tell you, I don't like their chances even more. Once again, I'm picking Kansas City here, but yeah, you can change based off of, but you have to say why you're changing.
So last week on the show, I had originally taken the Commanders to beat the Bucks, right? And I think it was on Friday, a couple of days before the game, I was like, you know what? The Bucks are at home. I just feel like I like Baker. I'm kind of pulling for them more. So I changed my pick. Yeah, I wasn't on the show, but I was texting our uncle who's in the comments here giving me a hard time because he's like, no, once you lock it in, you lock it in. And I'm like, the game hasn't started,
I'm kind of with your uncle on this situation now. No, because if you did it on air, then I'm okay with the switch. But now, I don't buy that you were flip-flopping. You gotta make the call here. So at some point, whatever we're doing this show. Is today Thursday? Yeah, today's Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
I'm losing my mind here. I don't know the damn days of the week here. We got NFL games on Saturdays now. I'm like, what? So that messes up your timeline. So whenever your last show is, whether or not you change your, I don't know, like kind of if you bet or whatever you're doing, then you can change it. But for all intents and purposes, if you don't have another opportunity on air to make the change, then null and void, man. All
right. That's fair. That's fair. Speaking of betting, we got a question from one of our followers, our resident gambler, my boy Sean Ho. He said, ask Mike to give us a divisional round parlay.
Sean, bro, I don't mess around with that, Sean. I don't mess around with that. I would be doing you a disservice. Now, if you're asking me some fantasy questions, trying to go through some of that stuff, maybe there's that. Here's what I can tell you, Sean. How about this? Instead of like a formal divisional round parlay, how about I just tell you dudes that I think you're going to ball out, like, and you make what you want of that. One guy we haven't talked about. Oh, do we want to get into the other divisional round, or you just want me to just start?
Yeah, we're gonna go on to the next one. So go for it.
Okay, so all right. So from a Kansas City perspective, like, guy that sort of like pops to me, like Kelsey to me seems like really obvious, right? Nico Collins seems very obvious to me. He
said, just pick a winner and I'll do the opposite.
Oh, okay, Sean. Done and done. So I'm going Kansas City. So if you're going to go opposite of that man and you win, please, Cindy, give Sean my number. He can text me and talk smack if that happens. Okay. No. I honestly, I love Kansas City. This week, I wouldn't, I think it's a closer game than maybe some people anticipate because of the way Houston has played. I love Detroit. I think the Lions are like just the grittiest, like dirtiest team, and dirty in a good way. Like just there's something along those lines. So I love that. I think if you said to me, pick your Super Bowl winner, the Ravens are the best team in the field. So to me, I think they're better than Kansas City. I think they're going to win on the road against Buffalo. I think they can beat any of the teams in the NFC. The Ravens, to me, are playing the best football, and they are the most dominant team in terms of their roster. So I love the Ravens big time. So Sean, go pick Buffalo then if you want to go opposite of me at home. So I love Ravens. And then who else am I missing here?
Rams, Eagles.
You know what? I actually like the Rams on the road. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, we were kind of discussing this last week also, like through text, like me and Sandeep, and I was like, man, the Rams, they just kind of feel like a dark horse Super Bowl team out of the NFC this year.
Yeah.
And they have the only coach that's won a Super Bowl in the NFC. So he has that experience. Obviously, in the trenches, they've been so dominant these last 6 or 8 weeks.
Sure.
Matthew Stafford, obviously his play has been up and down, but Kyron Williams has been amazing. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, obviously on the outside, on opposite ends, have been stellar. Those guys get so open for Matt Stafford. So I really do like the Rams in that game as well. So it's interesting that you do as well.
Yeah, I think people will point to the Rams and they'll look at their record. Here's what I'll tell you about that. They lost 4 of their first 5 games of the season, decimated by injuries, a revolving door on that offensive line. And I got to tell you, I was with this team in training camp, and I felt like they were a dark horse to win the Super Bowl. Like that's how I was talking about them to a lot of my colleagues. And, I felt like all the pieces were there, and everyone's like, oh, the Aaron Donald deal. Well, I'll tell you what, that front office has done an amazing job. You look at major contributors on the defensive side, whether it's Jared Verse, who is the only rookie defensive player in the Pro Bowl, 57 yards.
He made All-Pro, right?
Yeah. I don't think he was an All-Pro, but definitely not first team. You might have to Google that for me. But I know he's a Pro Bowler, so I know he's going to be there. But Jared Verse, you look at Kobe Turner a year ago, who could have been the defensive rookie of the year and was in that conversation. Cam Kitchens in that secondary. So the point is, we're talking about first and second year guys that are balling. If they were healthy earlier this year, I legitimately think they would have been pushing Detroit and Minnesota for the 1 seed in the NFC. So I think the world of that team. Philadelphia's defense to crack it, though, is going to be tough. Number 1 defense that we have in the NFL. They're not giving up a ton of points. Yeah. Stafford at times, a little whatever. He was surgical early in that game. I think I saw this, and don't quote me on this because I feel like Sean's going to like call me out if I'm wrong. But I think it's like a 6-game winning streak or something like that for Stafford right now, which might be the longest in his career, which I was like, that can't be right. And maybe it is, but Sean can fact check me and then he can text you guys, or if he's really fast on Google, hit me up with that. But the point is, the only thing that I worry about is the emotional aspect of this game. I live here in Los Angeles because that's where our studios are, and everyone knows about the fires, and obviously that's a really crappy situation. But to go from the emotional, like this heightened emotional state to then not play a game at SoFi Stadium when you've worked all season to get that home game. All good. You have to go to Arizona. Glendale, they were amazing down there and made it feel like a Rams home game. Awesome. They win that game. But then you got to get back onto a plane. You get home, not sure about practice, air quality, the whole thing. How do you stay like emotionally focused on a game when there's a lot of bandwidth personally and professionally that you're dealing with? Now you're going across the country to match up against that team when they kicked your butt at SoFi Stadium on your home turf a couple weeks back. So I do worry about the emotional side of it, but I think your point's a really good one with McVay and the experience. Like he probably's got those dudes on lock.
Yeah, this is a game that can really swing either way, right? I mean, you mentioned obviously the Eagles are the home team here, number one defense, got weapons on offense, and for the Rams to start with, how do you slow down Saquon, right? And that offensive line that the Eagles have is the best in the league, which is why big reason why Saquon's been able to do what he's done this season. But it's not just him, right? You got Jalen Hurts back there, Devontae Smith, AJ Brown. They got a lot of weapons. But both, the Rams defense, like you guys both mentioned, have been playing really well. This last stretch of the season as they've made this push to the playoffs. So, and the pressure's on the Eagles in this one, right? Because they're the home team, because they're the higher seed. The Rams, I mean, they knocked off the Vikings to get here, which that was a game we had both picked the Rams to win. I'm sure you did too. If you got them, winning this one. So it's a one that I think we could see go either way. Definitely one of the better games I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, we by the way, we're in the minority on that one. If you guys had Rams, I did the pregame show and I got a note from one of my bosses who said, "Thank you for picking the Rams." Texted back, I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Well, I knew I was the only one on our show because Steve Weich and David Carr both picked Minnesota in the game, but then he told me all the guys at ESPN clean sweep." Pick Minnesota. I'm like, man, I know more football than those dudes. Of course I picked them. So no, blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. So that's kind of what that was. But yeah, no, I think they got a real chance to win this game.
A question from this is my brother-in-law Dan, by the way, not even football related, but he's asking how are things down there in LA, the air quality, the fires and everything.
Dan, appreciate you asking, man. Not ideal. Today and yesterday were the first. Look how I'm looking outside. It's like 7:30 at night. It's dark out. I don't know what I'm looking at here, but yesterday and today were actually the first days where there were clear skies here, which was amazing to see. I definitely miss some of that stuff. The air quality is just kind of hit or miss. There's still fires that are burning right now. It does feel like things have settled a little bit. And I think there were concerns that the winds were going to pick back up, but they haven't been too crazy. But honestly, guys, like it is heartbreaking. You guys know in the Bay, because when I lived in San Francisco for 10 years, and Sandeep, you know this about me, like I'm a huge wine guy. I'm from the East Coast. I knew nothing about wine, moved out to the Bay Area, and then just fell in love with it and would go to wine country all the time. I was just up there in October for my birthday. It's like my happy place. I love it. And it was heartbreaking to see like the wineries and like a lot of, just wine, just in general, like the vineyards, the fires. I mean, remember, God, I forget what year that was. Like, was that 2019? It was like orange in the
2020.
city.
During the
Was that
pandemic,
2020?
yeah.
God, that was I tried to block out 2020 for so many reasons. But, I mean, it was like, and I'd never seen anything. It was like a legit movie. It was like you were on Mars. This was different down here. It wasn't like that. The air quality was bad down here. The only difference is these aren't like open. I mean, there's some open fields, but these are like homes and a lot of them. And it's very sobering to see the amount of destruction in like an urban environment like Los Angeles. I worry for the city because I don't know how you rebuild. They will. It's just going to take a lot of time, and it's just tough. The Olympics around the corner. I'm hoping because of that, there's some fast tracking in terms of some of the rebuild, but I don't know where families go, and like everyone talks about like Hollywood, and every time I turn on like CNN or something, it's like, some movie star talking about the fires. Like, all right, cool. Like I get it, but like there's like normal people, like that are not that lost their homes. And I can't imagine, it's very, very tragic down here for sure.
Yeah, I know people, that have been impacted down there. I've been seeing a lot of people on Instagram, but just posting about I lost my home or my parents lost their home. So it's been tough to see. I'm actually heading down there tomorrow in the afternoon. Going to be there for the whole weekend. So maybe if we have some time, we can try to get together too.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Watch some games a little bit or something. Yeah. I don't want to keep here much longer, so we'll quickly go through these last couple of games. Also, Sean said, if you're the only one who picked the Rams, maybe I'll have to go with the Chiefs, Lions, Rams, and Ravens then.
So Sean's just trying to get back in the good graces. I appreciate that. Honestly, if you're making those selections and you win, I'm happy to we can be on the same team. And if you lose, don't blame me. Just blame Sandeep. So
yeah,
that's what Sean does. He blames me, so it's okay. This game, yeah, you said the Lions. I think Ahmed and I are both going with the Lions here too.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it'll be a competitive game. I'm curious to see how the Lions, Aaron Glenn dials up that defense to try to stop the read option that we saw Jaden Daniels really effectively run last week. That's going to be the interesting thing to see. But I think ultimately, the Lions, especially with David Montgomery coming back too, there's going to be too much, I think, for them on offense. Yeah,
it's a really good call. Here's what look. I like Detroit. I'm excited to see Jaden in a game like this because I thought he played well against Tampa. And as these games unfold, it doesn't seem too big for him. Like it's pretty awesome to see some of this stuff. I was at his very first start. Pac-12 Networks was doing a show week 1. He got named starting quarterback. Herm Edwards was the head coach at ASU at the time, and first freshman quarterback to make a start. Don't quote me on the number. I think it was like 3 total touchdowns, 290, something like that. He threw 4. It was against Kent State. It's been hard for me to picture like this kid who was a kid. It was like 17, 18 years old at the time. Like this big. I mean, the kid was like rail thin. And to now see him, thrive at LSU, go to the Heisman, win the Heisman, and then obviously play as well as he had. It's remarkable, but he's made some big throws. David Carr turned to me and he goes, "Hey, he's like the younger version of Lamar." And I was like, "Damn, okay, like that's a hell of a comp." And I go, "David, do you agree with this, man? Like, he's further along as a passer in his rookie season than Lamar was?" He's like, yeah. So I think he's in store. We're lucky. We get to go and watch a pretty good quarterback, and I think it's going to be a fun game.
I think the only thing for us is it kind of sucks that he's in the NFC because we're probably going to see him at some point next season if the season goes the way we want it to go. So, but it's going to be it's definitely going to be entertaining. Obviously, our next pick that we have here, Rams at Eagles. You're going with the Rams on this one.
Oh, hell, you just cut out there. All I heard was Rams on this one. Sorry.
So I was just talking about like our next pick, Rams and Eagles. You're going to go with the Rams.
There we go. Yeah. I like Los Angeles for a lot of the reasons that we made reference to. Young defense, obviously played really well. One name we didn't bring up, doesn't get nearly enough credit. Kyron Williams, man. I think it's really 13 games this season with at least 1 touchdown from scrimmage. Only guy who's got more is the king and Derrick Henry. Kyron can run, man. The dude could play, run the football and play some defense, and I think the Rams got a chance.
I'm taking the Eagles for that one. For the record, let it be known right now. I'm taking the Eagles.
Don't. It's all good. You'll switch next on. You'll switch tomorrow. So.
He's gonna switch tomorrow.
All right, this last game, and we'll get out of here, man.
Sure.
This is the game of the weekend, right? This one we're all waiting for on Sunday night. Bills and Ravens. Ravens come in as a 1-point favorite going into Buffalo, which is crazy, right? When you think about how good the Bills have been this season, how good Josh Allen's been, how hard it is to play in Buffalo in January, but still, they said all the money was coming in on the Ravens originally, and the Bills were 1.5-point favorites at that time, which is why Vegas ended up swinging it the other way. And now the Ravens are a point favorite here. So I think the Bills are going to win this game, but it's kind of 50-50 here, right? Like you said, in your eyes, the Ravens are the most complete team. In my eyes, the Bills have been one of the best teams this season. They're the only teams that beat the Chiefs this year. I know the Ravens almost did. They got this close to doing it, but they didn't. The Bills did it. And to me, Josh Allen's been the MVP this season. Again, I know it's 50-50. If Lamar ends up winning it, I feel like which he probably will because he made first team All-Pro. It seems like it's going to go that way, and I can't argue against him. He's been incredible. But Josh Allen, I feel like just he's done more with less.
Agreed.
Derek, he doesn't have a Derrick Henry back there. Nope. I feel like the weapons have been slightly better for Lamar when you look at Zay Flowers, who's also questionable for this game, by the way. We know the Bills got Amari Cooper. He missed a few games. Didn't really have a huge impact like many thought he would right away. Khalil Shakur didn't start doing anything until Amari Cooper got there and kind of opened things up for him. James Cook, solid running back, obviously. Their rookie wide receiver, Keon Coleman, had an up and down season, but Josh Allen has just been the forefront of that team, right? So again, you can't go wrong with either pick here. But I just like the Bills a little bit more because I like Josh Allen, and I think their defense is a little bit more reliable than the Ravens.
Yeah, I'm actually, and I was listening to what you were saying because you were talking about their team. I just looked this up because I was like, hey, I don't know if the Bills have 1,000-yard receiver. So I just looked and they don't. Khalil Shakir is their leading receiver at 821 yards. So
Yep.
I think you make a lot of really good points. Would I be shocked if Buffalo wins? No, I'd be surprised though, because I think that highly of the Ravens. I think they're the best team in the NFL. I think they have the best roster. They did beat Buffalo. They smashed them earlier this season.
Yeah.
Derek played, amazing in that game. I just think they are a better football team than Buffalo is. Their roster is better. Their pieces are better. They have more options. Their defense is playing at a much higher level than it was earlier this season. Those are at least a couple of the reasons why I like Baltimore in this game on the road.
And who are you taking in this one?
Man, I love Josh Allen so much. I hope that he finally gets over the hump this year and he can actually go on a run, go to the Super Bowl and actually win it. For the city of Buffalo, they really need it as well. They went to the Super Bowl 4 straight years in the 90s and they just couldn't get it done. I feel like, he's been a savior for that franchise for sure. He's cut back on the turnovers.
Yeah.
And he's playing extremely, extremely good football with, like how we were saying, with not that great of a supporting cast around him on the offensive side of the ball, but I think I'm going to have to go with Mike on this one, man.
Yeah, we got room on the train.
I think the Ravens are going to win because of what I saw last week, how they just dominated the Steelers in the trenches, and the Steelers are no pushover on defense, right? They were a top 5 defense in the NFL all season, especially with their defensive linemen. So it's going to be really close. I feel like the Ravens are going to pull it off. I feel like the Ravens are probably the only team, them and Buffalo, that can beat Kansas City. So if you pick one of those two teams, I would probably go with the Ravens at this point because of what I've seen from the Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry duo. Plus, they blew out Buffalo at the beginning of the season, which means they kind of already have their number going into this game. They know that they can beat them. They have confidence that they can beat them, whether it's on the road or at home. So I'm going to take the Ravens in this one.
The only thing I would add, I'm just, because you made reference, Sandeep, to the loss to the Chiefs. So there was, and I just pulled up their schedule to help jog my memory a little bit. So week 1 against the Chiefs, they lose by a touchdown. But remember late in that game, as they likely caught, it wasn't, and it was the right call.
That's what I'm saying. It was like this much.
I mean, literally less than an inch, right? We're talking about probably centimeters there where it was out. So they lose that game. And look, that would have, potentially tied it, assuming that the extra point was good, and who knows what happens. So they lose by a score in that game. Raiders in week 2, that's still a little bit of a head scratcher. They lose by 3.
Yeah.
Fluke loss, right? But they were up 10 with basically in the fourth quarter. So a weird one. Browns, I think that was Jameis's first start, if I'm not mistaken. I know, holy Jesus. Yeah. Jameis threw for 334 in that game, but I believe that was his first start. So you can see this galvanizing moment from a Cleveland perspective inside that division. So that's another loss. Pittsburgh, when they lost that game on the road, that was crazy. So Derrick Henry fumbled on the opening drive. Derrick Henry never fumbles. Justin Tucker, I think, missed 3 kicks in that game and had 12 penalties. So penalties, by the way, is going to be a storyline because this team had some issues. And if they don't play clean, Buffalo could win this game. And the loss against Philly, I don't really remember all the details of that game. But the point is, so what is that, 5 losses on the season? Yeah. So 4 of the 5, and without remembering really what happened against Philadelphia, 4 of those losses, you're talking about being able to story wins. I'm just saying. So, I sound like such a homer, and I'm not even from Baltimore. So, but anyway, this is just a really good team. Really good team.
Yeah, like I said, I'm with you. If the Bills were to lose, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be surprised because Lamar's on the other side, and I think the same problem that the Lions are going to have in trying to stop that read option is the same thing the Bills. How are you going to stop that read option? This is the deadliest read option in the NFL. Yeah. Talking about Lamar and Derrick Henry, right? That's where it starts. And so if Zay Flowers doesn't play in this game too, I think that's definitely a factor. You would think the Bills are really going to try to make a point of emphasis to stop the run game and make Lamar beat them with his arm, but which he's able to do too. I mean, I think the only saving grace for the Bills is that they are at home this time around. That loss that they had earlier in the season was a while back, but it's something they're going to they bring in knowing that hey, we have to beat this team. They smacked us earlier in the season, and it's crazy that we're getting this matchup in the second round, right, in the divisional round. I mean,
totally.
that just shows you how good the AFC and the top 3 teams have been when you look at the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Ravens. And the good thing is one of those quarterbacks, whether it's Mahomes, Josh Allen, or Lamar, one of them is going to be in the Super Bowl, you know, and it's just a matter of who. And I think hopefully we get one of these 2 guys. Just it'd be nice to see one of these guys finally get over the hump, make it to that point, and you know, see somebody new kind of in the reign too. And again, that's me speaking as a Niner fan also, just and wanting to see Mahomes, you know, go down. But as a football fan, it would be great to see a Lamar Jackson or a Josh Allen who's have up and down postseason careers, right? And the one thing they both have in common is they haven't been able to get past Patrick Mahomes.
For sure.
One of them is going to have to do it after this weekend. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And there's a reason that's the game on Sunday night, prime time.
Yeah, it'll be a good one. It'll be a good one.
Mike, I want to ask you one question before we wrap up. I mean, obviously, like you do analysis, you know, throughout the year on various teams and whatnot. But what's one pick that you had at the beginning of the season that ended up being completely wrong from what you would have thought now?
Well, Niners are the obvious one because I thought it was going to be Niners Ravens in the Super Bowl. Like that was the team, and then. God, I'm trying to think what else. I didn't think the Commanders were going to be as good as. Certainly didn't think they would be a playoff team. Just sort of thinking off the top of my head. There's probably way more wrong assertions that I had than right ones, but those are some of the ones that stand out. I mean, look, I think we all felt really good about San Francisco. I didn't see Jaden having the amount of success this early. Bo Nix, I didn't see the Broncos being nearly as good as they are.
You know, we talked about like you were saying how like the Ravens just went in, you know, and smacked Pittsburgh last week. I mean, the Bills beat the Broncos 31-7, you know, and the Broncos, you talked about the Steelers being a top 5 defense. I'm pretty sure the Broncos were one of the best defenses all season long too. And Bo Nix was having a phenomenal season too. And to only put up 7 points against that Bills defense is pretty good job by the Bills too, you know, so.
That game was super interesting because Denver had a chance to tie it up going into halftime, and I think Will Lutz missed a field goal to tie it up at 10.
Yeah.
And Buffalo just went on a run after that, and the Broncos offense just couldn't recover from that missed field goal. Like they literally could not do anything the rest of the day after that. So I kind of think they felt like a momentum shift at that point. I think Buffalo felt really good that they were going into halftime with a lead, considering how the first half had played out, because if anybody would tell you, like, you know, Josh Allen should be dominating that game, he did in the second half. And I think it was just one of those scenarios where, you know, one thing goes wrong for the road team and it kind of just like, you know, caves in on you.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And I think that's why, you know, when you think about how these seasons have played out, you know, there's usually some surprises in the league, especially in the postseason, but more times than not everyone can live up to the hype. And, you know, I made reference to a couple of those teams, and you guys obviously, you know, living in the Bay, the Niners are certainly one of those squads. Just tough breaks for sure.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Mike, we're going to let you get out of here, man. We're going to call it a night.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, man, for joining the program. You know, you were great. Definitely.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We'll do it again, man.
Expectations, man. Your knowledge is next level for sure. So thank you for coming on.
I appreciate you guys. Appreciate the invite. Enjoy the games this weekend and looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And awesome. For all you guys who have tuned in, thank you guys so much. Please subscribe to the Deep Dive. Follow Mike Yam on Twitter and on Instagram. Catch him on NFL Network for NFL analysis every single day. And Mike, hopefully I can catch you this weekend in LA.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Safe travels. Okay.
All right. Thank you. See you.
Awesome. All right. Take care.
Thanks.